Great, thanks. So it's 6:01. My name is Ed McNamara. I'm Director of Planning for Department of Public Service. With me tonight, we have several folks from the department, including Commissioner June Tierney, who'll be giving some initial remarks in a second. Cindy Cook from Adamant Accord will be facilitating tonight, and we also have several DPS, Department of Public Service staff as well. Philip Peacock, Barry Murphy, and Ann Margolis are going to be helping out with the logistics. And Cindy, if you can walk us through the agenda at this point.
Sure. So as Ed mentioned, we'll have welcome and introductions from the Commissioner of the Department of Public Service. Then we'll go through a presentation on the draft of the next comprehensive energy plan, which is dated 2022, just next month. And then we will have comments. That's the whole point of this meeting, is comments from you all about the draft of the comprehensive energy plan, and then we'll have information about opportunities for more comment after this meeting. So I'm sorry that was a little bit disjointed because I'm tired, but I hope that you follow that the main point of this is to get your comments, and we'll get started in just a moment. So I would like to turn this over now to Commissioner of the Department of Public Service, June Tierney. So June, over to you.
Well, Cindy, thank you so much. And I do sympathize with your fatigue. So I thank folks for showing up tonight. I imagine they are every bit as tired as we are as well. But it is the nature of life in Vermont that we all wear many hats and we engage in these processes in our off hours. And I just want to underscore how much the department appreciates the effort that every Vermonter, every member of the public puts into giving us feedback on these planning documents, because at the end of the day, these are plans that are designed to inform your life in Vermont. And so it is so very important that we hear from you. Just, I would observe that our energy system was built to serve people through enabling the provision of critical services such as warm and healthy homes. Tonight's a cold night. It's not even winter yet, and we can see how important that is. And to do that heating of our homes and lighting of our homes with clean and reliable fuels that facilitate our mobility, the services that are necessary basically to power our everyday life. Our energy system is evolving, and technological changes over the last decade have set the foundation for that transition to a more affordable and cleaner and more efficient and reliable energy future. Now, Vermont's made great progress over the last several years. Indices of that progress are things like our implementation of the Renewable Energy Standard, which includes engaging our electric utilities in providing opportunities for fossil fuel reductions for their customers while keeping rates in check. We've doubled natural gas efficiency program investments. We've developed a broad array of charging facilities and support for customers and dealer incentives, as well as the development of charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, which just 15 years ago, 10 years ago, were really something that was more in the nature of fantasy than reality. And we've also installed over 400 megawatts of solar, and 50 megawatts of generation storage has been permitted. And we've updated access to affordable financing for borrowers. However, our work is only just getting started, and this comprehensive energy plan that we've prepared a draft of recognizes that Vermont is at a moment of great opportunity to take control of its energy future. It maintains and expands the aggressive renewable energy targets that we've had to date, and it aims to meet greenhouse gas reduction requirements of the state. And it does so, we believe, in a manner that intends to leave no Vermonter behind, because the energy system was designed to serve all people, and the focus of policies should be on what they need. We think we've done a good job pulling that draft together. And as I said at the top, we really welcome your input on how that draft can be improved. Now, as we strive to meet the vision of 90% renewable energy by 2050, as encoded in our statutes, we must recognize that the burdens and benefits of energy policy in Vermont have not been equitably distributed across the state or its citizens. This is a hard truth, and in Vermont, it is customary to tell each other hard truths as we pursue better solutions. That's one of them. And depending on your community, average energy spending as a percent of income can be 20%. And many individuals, of course, see much higher energy burdens than others, even than that 20%. And that forces tough decisions on paying for critical energy services or other bills. I have to tell you, more than once in my 5 years as tenure of commissioner, I have been confronted with the reality that there are people who hesitate to purchase their meds or purchase food because they need to prioritize paying their energy bill. And this is not acceptable in Vermont. We need to do better. Now, the plan that we've prepared a draft of relies heavily on the electric system to support the transition from technologies that power our transportation system and heat our buildings. And it sets a target of 100% carbon-free electricity by 2032. Now, it's critical that we continue to keep the electric sector costs down to better the economic proposition for customers to actually switch in electrifying their transportation or electrifying their heating means. So that requires, in part, having a secure and affordable electric grid that can efficiently integrate use, optimize high penetrations of distributed energy resources such as electric vehicles and heat pumps and distributed generation to enhance the state's resilience and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This also recognizes the role that broadband services play in delivering transformative technologies and to add the capability to manage those services and those technologies that will reduce costs for all Vermonters. Now, we recognize that the electric plan, the draft that we've prepared, is just the next step in an ongoing process to chart our energy future. That's why the plan describes the decision-making process, including reviewing policies from customers, utilities, state, and societal perspectives, and seeks to articulate trade-offs between policies for decision makers to understand and consider. This is your chance, folks. Thank you for showing up. I look forward to hearing what you have to say tonight. And Cindy, I'm going to turn this back to you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Tierney. And so now we're going to go to a few logistics. Please remain muted with your video off because some people have less than stellar online capabilities. This meeting will be recorded. It will be posted on the department website after the event is over. We'd love to hear your comments. And if you have a comment you'd like to make, please raise your hand using the function under the Zoom protocol. If you're online, or if you're on the phone, we'll check in with you to see if you have comments, and we want to make sure that everybody's heard. So let's move on to the next slide. We ask that you introduce yourself at the beginning of your comments, and if you're affiliated with an organization, please let us know that. Please be concise, please be respectful of others, and speak about your own truth rather than others. And please respect the timelines that we have. So when we get to the point of public comment, we'll suggest timelines, and I'll be in touch with you about making sure that you try to stay within those time constraints. If you know which part of the draft comprehensive energy plan you're commenting on, please refer to that. That will be helpful to department folks as they digest these comments. And if there's a time at the end of the meeting, there'll be comments to follow up on other ways you can comment. And at the last point on this screen is opportunities for further comment as we go forward. So next screen, please. Okay, so I'm going to transfer it over to you, Ed. And Ed McNamara is going to give a summary of the comprehensive energy plan. So take it away, Ed.
Great, thank you, Cindy. So again, for folks who joined a little bit later, my name is Ed McNamara. I'm Director of Planning for Department of Public Service. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to do a somewhat brief overview of the draft that we already have, just to help provide some context for any comments or questions that folks have. To start with, comprehensive energy plan is actually required in statute, and it specifically references the state's overall energy policy. You can find it in Title 30, Section 202A. Basically, it's saying that Vermont has to meet its energy needs in a manner that is adequate, reliable, secure, sustainable. We have to ensure affordability, also encourage states' economic vitality, use resources efficiently, and manage demands cost effectively. And then this part is relatively new. The Global Warming Solutions Act passed 2 years ago mandates GHG reductions, greenhouse gas reductions. And so all throughout the comprehensive energy plan, we've got references to how we're achieving those requirements. Next slide, please, Barry. So I'll be talking about comprehensive energy plan, or CEP. It's actually two different plans that we've combined together. And this has been a historic practice for the last decade or so. The comprehensive energy plan really looks at all energy usage in Vermont. So electric, but also heating, transportation as well. We look at 20-year analysis, projections, use, supply, cost, and importantly, the environmental effect. For the electric plan, it's much more focused on how we ensure that we meet the electric demand in a manner that's affordable, keep rates as low as reasonable. CEP is updated every 6 years. The 2016 CEP is the current version, and we're looking at the draft update for which will be published in January, in just about 6 weeks or so. Next slide, please. I mentioned the Global Warming Solutions Act. An important component of that is the creation of, in addition to instituting greenhouse gas reduction requirements, it also creates a climate council. I believe it's 23 members that work to develop the climate action plan. That is being released tomorrow. That is separate from the comprehensive energy plan that we're talking about tonight. However, over the last several months, actually over the last year or so, Department of Public Service has been working with Agency of Natural Resources and the Climate Council to help coordinate, to the extent possible, the public input, the development, the modeling associated, so that the comprehensive energy plan doesn't have assumptions over here and climate action plan has a completely different set of assumptions. We've been trying to coordinate to the extent possible. High-level climate action plan is looking at a lot of the things comprehensive energy plan is doing, but it has additional aspects as well. Adaptation, it's looking at the greenhouse gas inventory that the Agency of Natural Resources maintains, looking at carbon sequestration and other non-energy GHG emissions, agriculture, waste, and other sectors as well. The comprehensive energy plan is much more focused on the electric plan, including a focus on the reliability, looking at overall energy systems, adequacy, security, sustainability, affordability. Another important aspect I'll touch on later is standards for local planning, it's referred to as Act 174. In the middle is this overlap a lot of emphasis on GHG reduction. How do we actually meet the GWSA requirements? And as I mentioned, a lot of commonality on the public engagement and the modeling efforts that we've already had, and a lot of commonality on the equitable, how to achieve an equitable transition. Next slide, please. I mentioned modeling a little bit, just very briefly here. We've used the low emissions, oh, my apologies. I'm actually forgetting exactly what LEAP. It's a modeling platform developed several years ago. It's a scenario-based modeling tool. It tracks energy consumption, production, and also resource extraction in all sectors of the economy. It can be used to account for both energy sector, non-energy sector greenhouse gas emissions sources and sinks. This is something that a lot of other states have used, and Department of Public Service has worked pretty closely with Agency of Natural Resources on this model, and also with some of the Climate Council's consultants as well, using this model and a lot of the assumptions as a basis for both plans. Next slide, please. I'll run through this briefly. For the last year or so, we've been working with the Climate Council on stakeholder engagement. Back in the summertime, we actually had we had 4 topical stakeholder meetings looking at sort of grid evolution, transportation, electricity, and also thermal heating as well. And getting a lot of folks who have interest in those particular issues, getting them together, talking about what are the most significant issues, what are the challenges, and potential solutions to address those challenges. That helped inform the modeling that we did. It also helped inform this draft that we've just published about a week and a half ago now. So the next steps are these public hearings, getting written comments through December 20th, actually. And then in mid-January, we'll be adopting a CEP. The reason we're saying provisionally adopted CEP, the Global Warming Solutions Act requires that the Comprehensive Energy Plan be consistent with the Climate Action Plan. Climate Action Plan has some moving pieces, and so we're trying to ensure that we stay consistent with the Climate Action Plan to the extent that the Climate Action Plan is updated, we will then look at whether the Comprehensive Energy Plan needs to be updated. Next slide, please. At a very high level, what we did here is we focused on the principles, the ones I mentioned earlier: affordability, cost effectiveness, reliability, also including equity and transparency as well. We looked at different pathways for actually reducing energy use, increasing renewables, looking at more specific strategies. This is a little bit more detailed as you go up this pyramid. From pathways, we get down to strategies that are a little bit more detailed. Then the recommendations are even more detailed than that. 2 themes that we've had throughout the CEP is equity. I'll touch on a little bit more, and also grid optimization. Next slide, please. So equitable transitions. This quote is from Susanna Davis, Vermont's Director of Racial Equity. "Every one of us benefits when we make society fairer and more just." The benefits of moving to a cleaner, more sustainable energy source is not shared equitably among Vermonters. It's primarily people of means that can afford electric vehicles, distributed generation, storage, etc. What we're looking to do with the CEP is to name that and also look at potential opportunities to make this transition to a more sustainable energy system, more equitable. Basically, as the commissioner noted earlier, ensure that all Vermonters have access, that it can't just be one sector or one segment of Vermont. It needs to be everybody who can participate in this. Next slide, please. The other main theme in this draft CEP is grid optimization or grid evolution. We need to, as the commissioner mentioned, we're moving towards electrifying the transportation and thermal sectors. That's how we're going to meet our decarbonization goals, or requirements, I should say, the GHG reduction requirements that we have in the statute. That means that we're going to be asking a lot of the electric grid. We're going to need to ensure that the electric grid is secure, it's reliable, it's affordable, and it can be optimized to ensure that there's a high penetration of distributed energy resources. What a distributed energy resource is: an electric vehicle, it's a heat pump, distributed generation, Tesla Powerwalls. Essentially, how do we get all these different devices to play well together, to work together so that they're actually benefiting Vermonters as a whole? Next slide, please. Next couple slides, I'm going to touch on the different sectors: electric, transportation, and thermal, where we are now, and what the draft CEP is saying. So for electricity, the left-hand pie chart is showing the physical sources of electricity right now. You can see that Hydro-Quebec, hydro-nuclear, a large part of our electricity is coming from zero carbon generation currently. We also have a renewable energy standard that requires the retirement of renewable energy credits. So on the right-hand side, that pie chart looks different because that's showing the renewable energy credit retirements to comply with the renewable energy standard. That's primarily Hydro-Quebec, hydro, and then also solar to meet the in-state requirement of our renewable energy standard. And then nuclear continues to meet the largest portion of Vermont's electric mix that is not met by renewables. Next slide, please. So moving forward, what the CEP is discussing and recommending is 100% carbon-free by 2032. The existing renewable energy standard gets us to 75% renewable by 2032. We're recommending 100% carbon-free by that point. So the CEP we spend a fair amount of time to actually describe the existing electric structure to ensure that people have an understanding of the electric costs. Right now, Vermonters spend roughly $900 million a year on electricity. So we want to provide some transparency about how that shows up on customers' bills, explain the costs of mandated programs that we have in Vermont, and then also discuss a little bit about the trade-offs associated with decreasing greenhouse gases in the electric generation sector, or through electric generation. Provide some context, and then also explain some options and some trade-offs for how we actually achieve 100% carbon-free. Next slide, please. So for thermal, for heating, left-hand chart shows the different fuel sources that we use for heating in Vermont, primarily heating oil, propane, and natural gas. Most of the renewable heating in Vermont currently comes from wood. That's the largest portion, and then there's also some electric usage as well through rapidly increasing adoption of electric heat pumps. On the right-hand side, that chart is showing the cumulative building energy retrofits, essentially weatherization, the number of housing units that are weatherized. You can see steadily inclining or increasing progress here. And while it looks somewhat impressive, it's a continuous increase. We're not meeting our goals for weatherization. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time in the CEP discussing that. Next slide, please. So in the heating sector, the goal is to increase renewable supply to 30% by 2025, 45% 2032, and 70% by 2042. The pathways we would use, or we're recommending to get there: on the left, reduce energy demand, weatherization at scale, weatherization assistance programs, the energy efficiency utilities, how to find a sustainable funding, how to develop the workforce to get folks out to actually do the work. And then also counseling. Essentially, that's helping folks understand what programs are out there. Increasing the efficiency of buildings through the building energy standards. And also state energy management program is an existing program we have, and how we can actually enhance that to achieve even greater weatherization. On the right, that pathway is basically providing additional renewable fuel. And we're recommending considering a clean heat standard. This is something the Climate Council in particular is recommending. We're suggesting take a good look at this. This would create a standard where all dealers would essentially have to provide, would be incentivized to provide either weatherization or other options for other renewable options. Looking at clean fuels, both heat pumps, ground source and coal and electric heat pumps, advanced wood heat, district heat, biofuels, and then renewable natural gas. Next slide, please. So for transportation, essentially the takeaway from this slide, the vast majority of our energy use in the transportation sector understandably comes from cars. Most of that coming from gasoline, at least for cars. For heavier duty, for trucks, for others, it's primarily diesel. Electricity right now in the transportation sector is providing a very small portion of the energy usage in transportation. So next slide, please. So this is showing the pathways that we're doing to increase that electric portion. Vehicle electrification is something that everyone's probably familiar with. We have vehicle incentives. This is something all the electric utilities are providing incentives for electric vehicles. The state is also providing incentives, light duty, medium duty. Also other systems as well, Mileage Smart, Replace Your Ride. There's lots of programs that are currently in effect. In addition, we need to look at the infrastructure and the policies behind these, not just providing incentives, but how do you set up the electric rates in such a way that they can provide the incentives through lower electric rates for your electric vehicle if you allow the utility to control the timing of your load to reduce overall electric costs. How do you increase the charging price transparency for public EV charging? Also working for auto dealers, increasing the awareness and some other mechanisms. On the right-hand side, folks are probably familiar, Transportation Climate Initiative is at this point mostly defunct due to decisions in part by other states. But we're going to recommending continuing participation in these regional discussions and also looking at what California is doing with advanced clean car requirements. Also look at the be monitoring biofuels, low carbon fuel requirements in other states and how those can be emphasized in Vermont as well. Next slide. Another important factor for transportation, in addition to increasing electrification, is reducing demand. And that is looking at essentially smart growth, more compact development, doing better planning across government agencies, across Department of Public Service, Agency of Transportation, Agency of Natural Resources. In addition, looking at how we can improve the options people have for alternatives to single occupancy vehicles. Public transit, how do we encourage more bicycling, more pedestrian, more walking? What are those kind of options that we can actually, what sort of programs can help get folks out of their cars and using the public transport? Next slide, please. In addition, we have a couple other aspects in the CEP as well. Energy finance is a standalone chapter that really talks about how we leverage private funding to achieve all of these goals. State agency energy plan is something that the Vermont's Buildings and General Services, Department of Buildings and General Services, they have the state agency energy plan that essentially describes how state agencies should be, what actions state agencies should be doing to meet Comprehensive Energy Plan, Global Warming Solutions Act requirements and goals. Act 174, this was passed a few years ago, and this required regional planning commissions to develop enhanced energy planning standards. Essentially, how can you implement through the planning process on the regional level and municipal level exactly what we're talking about here: compact growth, district heating, a lot of other aspects like that. Also forthcoming, we don't have this yet, we're still waiting on our consultant, appendices that provide additional detail about the modeling, why we use particular assumptions, how the model works, things like that. That is a very high-level overview of this 200 some odd page draft CEP that we've released. Next slide, please. So,
Ed, before we get to this point, I'd like to just intervene that I think this is the point where people who have comments can make them, and we'd love to hear from them about what they think about the current plan and how they'd like it to be modified. And so is that, am I right on that? I'm sorry.
You are right. I just want to just very briefly flag here that for folks who aren't able to necessarily stick around tonight, here's how you can provide additional comments as well by email, written mail, and the website as well. Just wanted to make sure folks were aware of that if people have childcare or other timing constraints tonight.
Understood. Yeah.
Yep.
So please comment however you wish, and if you're wanting to comment this evening, please raise your hand via Zoom, and we'll check in and see how many people want to comment and figure out how much time you have based on the number of people who want to comment. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Philip, of how many people do you see that are wanting to comment?
Thanks, Cindy. So right now I see just Megan has raised her hand. There are different versions of Zoom. So there's a decent chance that the feature to raise your hand is under the reactions button. It looks like a smiley face, but if you click it, there are different emotions you can share, but more importantly, there's a raise hand button, which is the best way. So I see some other folks are finding that option. If for some reason you can't find the raise hand, feel free to just use the chat function to express your interest in speaking. But with that, Megan, you raised your hand first, so please go ahead.
Sure. Hi, I'm Megan Rodier, Regional Planner with the Lamoille County Planning Commission. And I just had a couple of questions that came to my mind while you were going through your presentation. I'm happy to see that, especially in the heating sector, you are considering bioheating as a consideration. And, you know, I think for folks who have like baseboard heating systems, for example, I'm one of those, you know, switching to something like going to 100% biofuels is a little more affordable approach to at least start to make that transition. So related to that, I know that in our region, Bournes has already, you know, developed the infrastructure to be producing a lot of biofuel for heating needs and offering that to their customers. So I didn't know, and I know I think they went through, maybe it was a Northern Borders grant or something like that in the past. I didn't know if there's funding available or coming down the pike to help other heating companies in other parts of Vermont to really establish the infrastructure to, you know, produce 100% biofuel heating.
Great, thanks for that. So to my knowledge, there's no other program specifically on biofuels. There is Clean Energy Development Fund, which has been focused on advanced wood heating, so wood pellet boilers, other aspects like that. I know Bournes also provides 100% biofuel and also wood pellets as well to different customers. We are looking at enhancing the availability of biofuels, but it's a great point that this is not something that we're specifically looking at enhancing the ability for providers to access that additional or additional avenues for biofuels. So I don't believe we have that in the draft. Sorry, and I should also have pointed this out earlier. This draft was written by lots of people. We had a lot of input from agencies across state government. So if I am stumbling a little bit on some of the more detailed answers, my apologies, and happy to follow up on some of these as well, if I get anything wrong.
Thank you so much. My only other question, I guess this is more of a clarification question. You mentioned renewable natural gas. I guess I don't really think of natural gas as quote unquote renewable. But part of that might be because I went to graduate school in Ohio. Maybe that explains why I don't think of it that way, because I understand the environmental impacts. I didn't know if you're defining that a little differently. That was my question.
Yep. No, it's a great question. I should have explained that a little bit better. So renewable natural gas is essentially if you take an anaerobic digester, in Vermont, we've got a fair number of farm methane systems.
Yep.
Essentially, it's taking the methane from those systems, and instead of using it to generate electricity, it's putting it into a pipeline. Middlebury College worked with, forgetting the name of the farm, down in that area to actually access renewable natural gas for its facilities. So it's essentially taking methane from anaerobic digestion, whether it's through food waste, farm operations, or municipal waste, or different aspects or different ways to produce what's called renewable natural gas.
Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, I don't know if there's another way to clarify that in the plan. But that makes a lot more sense. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
And the next hand is from Sriram.
Yes. Hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sriram Srinivas, and I'm a resident of South Burlington. And recently, I have signed up for the local climate action task force. So I have a few comments on maybe on a higher level thinking on how Vermont is approaching actually getting to the greenhouse gas emissions target. So the electrification piece, is pretty straightforward. I understand it. The transportation piece, I think at the end of the day, the adoption rate is going to be driven by how many people decide to switch cars, and also how they're able to access infrastructure. So I think that's going to be on a path on its own, I believe. The only point that I wanted to make there is, from what I understand from the incentives today, some of the local incentives apply only to income up to $100,000. There is a substantial population in Vermont that makes more than $100,000. I would think that if you want earlier adoption of EVs, the incentives could be extended to the higher income population as well. So that's one comment about transportation. The bulk of my comments are really around the whole housing thermal part of the program. So from what I understand, the energy equity issue is a significant issue in Vermont. And I understand that for the low-income families, the access to funding and technologies is a significant hurdle, especially for those living in rural areas. Having said that, I also think that there needs to be a better carrot and stick mechanism for the high income group and people who live in bigger houses who contribute to more greenhouse gas emissions. In South Burlington, where I live, there is a significant number of homes that are larger than 3,000 square feet with affluent families. And there is very low penetration of heat pumps to transition from natural gas. And if you look at the implementation data for South Burlington and Chittenden County, you can see that the progress rate over the last 3 or 4 years is not that impressive. So I get concerned about existing housing in these affluent neighborhoods that are currently hooked up to natural gas. I don't see a real clear path for transition that people are going to switch to electricity-based heat pumps of their own. So I do think that there needs to be a more creative carrot and stick mechanism. What I mean by carrot is those who implement these projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in housing should be recognized somehow. And those who do not implement, maybe they should pay some other form of penalty or taxes.
So do you have comments related to this, to what we've just heard? I'd like to hear from the state.
Yeah, actually, I'll start with the transportation in terms of incentives. There's different pots of money available for different incentives. The incentives from the electric utilities, I don't believe those are capped at a particular income. Some federal dollars, especially from some of the COVID relief funds, I believe those are capped much more, or do have upper income caps. So understand what you're saying about ensuring that all folks can have access to incentives to switch to electric vehicles. And I would just say that there's different pots of money available. In terms of discussion on thermal, it's an interesting, it is difficult, and it's an interesting issue of carrots versus sticks of, for the most part, we're talking, when it comes to individual Vermonters, we want to provide as much education and incentives rather than using sticks to achieve the different goals. And there's a lot of interrelated aspects here. For existing houses on natural gas prices can be volatile. Electric rates tend to be much more stable over time. And so it's providing education to folks of, here's the economic benefit of switching to heat pumps, switching to biofuels, switching to something that has more predictable prices on a going forward basis. It's also important too, or that highlights the importance of ensuring the affordability in the electric sector, so that if somebody, to increase the incentive for somebody to switch from natural gas or heating oil or propane to a heat pump, electric rates need to be affordable. It needs to make sense for folks to actually switch. To make that switch, there's different ways that we can look at rate design, how you actually incentivize individual devices like electric vehicles, potentially heat pumps as well. If you can do what's called sub-metering, you provide, in theory, you can actually provide lower rates for your heat pump when you're using your heat pump, because that incentivizes the use and incentivizes people to switch over. Understand what you're saying about the carrot, the stick approach as well, and this draft is much more heavy on incentives and education than using sticks to discourage specific usage of fossil fuels. So I'm not sure if that's a compelling answer to you, but that's our general thinking for the draft CEP. I don't know if you have any follow-up comments on that.
I appreciate your broader perspective on this, but I just think that at the end of the day, if you want residents to contribute towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions, every resident needs to play a role. And I think the equity issue needs to be properly addressed to the higher side as well. So I'm just not sure what is involved here. Maybe I'm raising an unpleasant issue here, but so.
No, I would not say an unpleasant issue at all. You know, we really are open to comments. It's a valid point. I think it's more of a philosophical difference of how, you know, the role of state government in individual decisions as well. So, you know, appreciate the comment, and I'm not trying to invalidate your comment. I'm not trying to say you're wrong. I'm simply noting that we have taken a different approach in this, and definitely appreciate the feedback that we ought to consider using sticks in addition to carrots. It's valuable feedback. It's useful, and
okay.
I want to appreciate the comments that we've had, and also encourage people to have other comments that are related to the comprehensive energy plan. So there are other people out there who've come to this meeting and have comments.
Yes, I think Donna is next up. Thank you for raising your hand. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure. Hi, thanks. Thanks very much. I think I'd like to address my questions and comments mainly to the strategy encouraging efficient buildings and equipment. Two things mainly. You talk about builder registration and the entire construction community who are licensed professionals, as well as you know, builders who are the most knowledgeable, educated builders. All are very much in favor of at least builder registration. And it connects back to the enforcement of the residential energy standards. I think that the recommendations for action are extremely weak. You know, especially because we've been trying to fight this battle for 20 years now and trying to get builders to comply with the energy standards when there is no enforcement of those standards, particularly at the residential level. So, you know, asking the municipalities to consider requiring permitting and certificates of occupancy, it's like consider, that's really weak. And the municipalities shouldn't be the ones who are hiring code officials. It should be done in a way that the interpretations will be consistent statewide. That's been a problem for Act 250. That's been a problem for everything regarding compliance. And so AIA Vermont and the Public Policy Committee did recommend that the state look at what's considered a circuit rider program, where they would hire the code officials who would then basically work with the local municipalities and basically all be interpreting the code the same way. And that has some potential really powerful action when it comes to educating builders, because, you know, maybe not all the builders are going to register, but by working with the municipalities, you know, we feel that it's going to be much more powerful, because you're going to be able to talk to the builder right at the point where they're getting their permits. And it would also give the local officials a very strong degree of assurance that either this builder is or is not meeting the requirements of the code. And we feel very strongly. When I say we, I mean the Public Policy Committee at AIA Vermont, which is, you know, consists of licensed architects around the state. So the authority having jurisdiction, this is another recommendation of AIA Vermont. The authority of having jurisdiction really needs to be the Department of Public Safety. the building safety department at the, rather than the public service department, just because the public safety department does all of the code enforcement. All of the other code enforcement is under that body. They need to have the resources to do this, but there may be a way so that the communities that are having the most residential construction done, and I live in South Burlington, and there's hundreds of new homes being built here every year, that there should be some kind of way of assisting in the funding of the circuit rider program through those communities that are taking advantage of it. I just think this language needs to be, not should, it's must. This has gone on for 30 years now, where, ever since we've had the energy codes, they have not been enforced. And, now it's starting to really hit the fan, because people are starting to realize that a lot of regulations in Vermont aren't being enforced when it comes to building safety. And building energy is a very, very important, and we're not going to get to our goals if we don't start enforcing these as requirements, not suggested actions. They need to be requirements. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask the group any comments and responses to those interesting and important comments.
So I see that my boss has raised her hand.
Yes.
So I'm going to wisely defer to Commissioner Tierney.
Thank you, June. And then Ed, if you have follow-ups.
It's always wise to defer to me, Ed, because then you look so much better later. Donna, I want to thank you for those comments, because I quite agree with you that there's a long history in Vermont of there being regulations, rules, codes on the books, and the reality is quite different. I just wanted to flag the point that the power to make those things stick in the way that you suggested, as you well know, is in the hands of the legislature. And what this document does is provide the basis for advocates such as yourself, as well as state agencies and the like, to go into the legislature and advocate precisely for the must and the shall that you're pointing to. So I don't know that improves matters, but I just wanted to clarify that the plan and the authority or jurisdiction that the department is exercising in formulating the plan does not come with the power to compel the actions that we're identifying, but we are elevating them here. That's all. Ed, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Well, just maybe say should strongly suggest. I don't think the language is even close to strong enough.
Fair enough. And I think what may be happening there is is our culture of deference as an agency may be talking when we express ourselves in a certain way before the legislature and the PUC, and it's by necessity a posture of deference to a certain degree. And I take your point, and that's something that we can definitely take home and socialize.
And I think the municipalities may be a lot more favorable toward it with the circuit rider approach. So I would definitely put that in there. It's worked in the past, for the commercial building energy standards. That brought a lot of architects and a lot of engineers on board with the code, 10 years ago when Stu Sloat was sort of doing that work. That might have been even longer than 10 years ago. But
I do recognize the name.
Yeah, we really do need people like that out there, because, expecting builders to come to seminars for education, it's just not realistic. Most of them cannot take the time to do that. And most of them won't take the time to do it. If you come to them and you see what they're doing and get some hands-on education, it's just going to be so much more effective.
Fair enough. So let me just be clear. I have a habit of nodding because that is a form of active listening. Yeah. And you are making yourself very clear, and the feedback has been noted. When I nod tonight, you'll forgive me, it's not an indicator of agreement to do something, but it is definitely an indicator that you are making yourself heard, and these matters will be reflected upon. Now, Ed, you're nodding, and I'm not sure what that means, but I am going to ask you to take over from here.
Okay.
Great,
And
thanks.
I was going to jump in and encourage you all to continue this conversation offline. And I just love it that you're having this conversation. So thank you. And over to you, Ed.
Great, thanks. Just actually one little detail. Donna, when you mention AI, can you actually explain who that is, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. American Institute of Vermont, or American Institute of Architects, Vermont
Architect.
chapter.
Great, thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure we had that. I know that other folks at the department are very familiar with that. I was not, so my apologies. Thank you. So yeah, Donna, happy to have more discussion offline about that. I appreciate the very specific recommendations as well. That's very helpful. So thank you.
So where are we at this point, Ed? I think we're finishing.
I think we think Annette Smith, I believe you're next, unless Philip, I'm missing somebody.
No, you're right. Annette is next, and then we're going to return to Sriram, who has some more comments. But he said it's okay
Great.
if Annette goes next. Go
Hi,
ahead.
Annette.
Great, thank you.
I'm Annette Smith with Vermonters for a Clean Environment. I feel like I'm one of the usual suspects now, and I'm looking at the number of people who are on this and thinking, how does the general public get involved in this? Because we're not seeing it. So I will confess that I haven't finished reading the plan. I am very proud of myself for actually taking 4 days off. And if I was going to do anything over the holiday 4 days, I would have read the plan. So I'm about a third of the way through. So I've signed up for Thursday's hearing too, and I'll probably have finished it by then. So my first comment is I was very surprised there's no table of contents. For a document like this, it really should have a table of contents, and it would be very helpful if it was clickable to each chapter. I admit to being, the right word isn't skeptical, but at least cautious about electrification of everything. And in particular, the issues that are really bubbling up, I think globally around the electrification issue have to do with the massive increase of mining that is necessary to fuel this transition. We're talking about cobalt, copper, lithium. There are now news stories in mainstream media all the time. I've been submitting them to, not all of them, but some of them to the Climate Council. And when we talk about a just transition, I don't think we can do that without reflecting what that means in this plan. And just to say, oh, everybody's going to get electric cars and everybody's going to have lithium batteries, and we're going to deploy solar panels that may be made by slave labor in China in a very toxic process, and we're outsourcing those environmental impacts to other countries. I think that it's deficient to not at least talk about it and be honest about the challenges that we face in making this transition. The other sort of real world thing I will point out is I don't want an electric vehicle right now. And the reason is because I don't trust them to not catch fire. I mean, Chevy Bolts, I haven't read about Nissan Leafs catching fire, but Teslas are in the news fairly regularly catching fire, and the massive quantities of water necessary to put these fires out. I just don't think it's honest to present a plan that has sort of this, glossy picture of this is what we're going to do without at least discussing some of the impediments that the average person is seeing in the news. And, and since I do live off grid with solar and have a fairly low carbon footprint, live in a small house, nobody rewards me for the choices that I've made. I have high-speed fiber optic internet, so I have a home office. I literally stay home for weeks at a time. So this idea that we're all going to live in compact village centers, I find a bit offensive, and the plan doesn't reflect the opportunities for people staying home as a way of reducing vehicle miles traveled. As opposed, if you've got a home office and you don't have to go out every day the way we have traditionally done, maybe there's another transition to acknowledge, which is that our abuse of the planet can slow down by people working out of a home office and taking advantage of high-speed internet, and with the hope that Commissioner Tierney will get it all deployed all throughout the state. And but this is real. And so, okay, I get up in the morning and I milk a cow. Not everyone's going to do that, but I have milk. I don't have to go out and buy milk. I have chickens. I don't have to go out and get eggs. I grow a big garden. I don't have to go to the grocery store very often. So those are things that people have opportunities to do. People then say, well, Annette, everybody's not going to live like you. But the whole idea of staying home more and not going out much is not a radical idea. And once you can work out of a home office, I literally sometimes wonder when the last time I was in a car. Okay, now, another thing that I think needs to be sort of fleshed out a little more, it's touched on in the plan, has to do with the idea of using smart meters and then the wireless appliances in people's homes. I think I saw it more specifically in the climate action plan, but I haven't finished reading that either. I mean, if you really want to pay attention to this stuff, the public just got hit with over 500 pages of material, one of which isn't finalized. But one of the plans, and I don't think it's this one, talks about making sure that electric hot water heaters are fitted with some sort of port. And the idea is to be able to control it. And the concern is if that's done wirelessly, there's an increasing amount of radio frequency radiation that people are exposed to. It makes people sick. I don't use wireless in my house because it gives me a headache. I know what it feels like. And so I'm concerned that it's unspoken in the plan, but that there is a plan that the utilities are very much interested in manipulating people's appliances within their homes. And if that's done wirelessly, I think that is pushing a potential health issue onto people that is something that needs to be not ignored and needs to be brought out. In the plan, there is a cost of fossil fuels, what Vermonters spend on fossil fuels. And one thing that I often hear is how much we spend on fossil fuels and it leaves the state. Well, okay, how much is leaving the state right now with the renewable energy development we've had? I think quite a bit. A lot of the big solar projects, the wind projects, that money is not staying in state. But I think that the cost comparison I would like to see is right now we're spending X dollars, it's in the plan, how much we're spending on fossil fuels. And what I'm not seeing is what this transition, if the electric vehicles and electric hot water and electric heating, if all these things are transferred to electricity, what is that cost? And I just think that we need to be more transparent about those things. And with that, I think that that's all the notes that I have for the moment, but I may have more on Thursday. And thank you very much for your good work.
Great. Thank you, Annette. And appreciate flagging some of those issues. What we're trying to do with this CEP is trying to be more transparent about trade-offs. And so thank you for identifying some of the trade-offs that we have not identified in the draft to date. So appreciate that. So Philip, I believe we had.
Yes, so Shriram has more comments to offer. So go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. The area that I wanted to focus on is really the net zero building standard. I believe the standard will go in effect 2030. Is that a recommendation, or is that one of those things where builders have to comply with?
I'm sorry,
The net zero building standard by 2030, is that a requirement or is that a recommendation?
that is, Barry Murphy can correct me if I'm wrong. Essentially, this Department of Public Service hosts a building energy code working group that makes recommendations as to what the appropriate building codes are for both residential and commercial. And the recommendation is to work with that working group to move towards a 100% net zero ready building code for residential by 2030. And so sorry, I might be splitting hairs here. Basically, we're not requiring it. We're saying the state should be moving towards that. And the Department of Public Services, who leads up this working group, will be working with that group to move towards that. Does that nuance make a little bit more sense? Sorry about that.
Well, I think it's kind of parallel to some of the comments that Donna made earlier. So I have to say that, look, I mean, net zero buildings, when they are in place, basically the embodied carbon that is involved in building the building is much less. Typically, American homes have like 50 metric tons of CO2 with the new construction every time you build something new. And then there is the ongoing CO2 emission every year associated with your type of insulation and the heating source you have. So net zero, a true net zero building will have the least embodied carbon, and then it will have a fully air-conditioned and heating system that is based on electricity and heat pumps, not based on any fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
So when I hear that net zero building ready, I'm not exactly sure whether the embodied carbon will be addressed in the first place with the appropriate materials of construction. And number two, whether the electrification concept will be in place. I mean, maybe the electrification capability can be accommodated, but again, this is an area I think the more construction happens, the harder it's going to become to retrofit buildings. Once you put natural gas there, it's very, very hard to retrofit. So if this is again a recommendation that's going to go in 2030 and compliance is not going to happen for another, I don't know how many years, I'm just not sure whether it will help achieve the greenhouse gas emissions target, especially in a lot of these urban development. I mean, South Burlington, I was told last night that there are 1,400 homes in the pipeline to be built. I mean, that's a pretty substantial number. So I'm sure other parts of Vermont are like that. So I guess maybe my, having lived here only for 2 years, maybe my understanding is maybe some of these things are very, very hard to mobilize in Vermont. Maybe the state needs to have a vision for a critical mass of net zero homes and figure out a way to bring in new business through capable builders and have a vision. If the existing builders are not willing to adopt, maybe there needs to be a different thinking here. So I'll end with that.
Thank you. That's really helpful. That discussion, especially on the embodied carbon, that's something that I'm not remembering if that was actually included in the draft, but it's an excellent point. And also the pace as well. There's, this gets to what we talked about earlier, the carrot versus stick and sort of philosophical. And, another aspect as well is sort of the pace of ratcheting down, or, the pace of development, or sorry, the pace of decarbonization, and ensuring that we keep in mind affordability while also ensuring that we're pushing, that we're reducing GHG emissions as quickly as possible. And it's a balance, and there's always different sides to the balance. So very much appreciate you articulating that. It's very helpful.
And
Thank
so
you.
if you have suggestions as to how the state could make mandates or other sort of standards available, please let the state know. And because that's the whole point of this whole conversation, is how can we make things as what can we do to make this I'm blathering, but I know that there are other people that want to speak, so I'm going to move on to
I saw Steve's hand next, and then
Yes.
Pat, and then Lisa.
Thank you, Phil.
Steve, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. I will reserve mostly till later to get through the full draft and then comment. But since it's South Burlington, it seems to be South Burlington night at the hearing. I will add my voice as a resident, and really in support of what Sriram and Donna have said. I'll make two quick comments. One, anything that's not net zero today is a retrofit problem for the future. It's not too early to get going on that as a real clear standard. Secondly, from a finance perspective, which can often relate to even things like an equity basis for this, although that's more complicated. But from a financial perspective, if you can roll these things into a mortgage, then you've almost solved the problem. It's the short-term financing, the things that have to sort of break even in 7 years or 10 years. If you can, are often just hard to meet. If you can roll something into the mortgage, then some of these really, the deeper dive makes more and more sense. So that's my only comment. So thank you. I'll be back later.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And I would encourage you to take a look at the financing chapter when you do get a chance to take a look at that, and any specific comments that you have on following up on the financing. It's always a challenge, so appreciate any comments on that. Pat?
Hi, I'm Pat Sagui. I live in Westfield, and I want to just chime in supporting what Steve just said. Having written about energy efficient mortgages almost 20 years ago, that element, helping people with the math. I want to talk about math, and I want to talk about language. And what I have learned in my 40 some odd years of trying to be efficient, living off the grid for 10 years, not now, that helping people with the math is critical. I have conversations with people and I don't know, it just goes nowhere. And I'm not sure how that happens. I just know that it has to happen. And I will say I am thrilled with my water heat pump. And again, getting to the math, as it happened, I had to upgrade a refrigerator, not to anything fancy, but the efficiency of the new refrigerator offset all the electricity for the hot water pump. And my son did the calculations for me. He said, Maya, maybe $5 a month more. When I asked my electric utility, and I'm not trying to bash my electric utility, I'm just pointing out the importance of getting the math right. They said, well, it could be as much as $25 a month. Well, I would have thought about this really differently if it had been $25 a month. And so anyway, just a comment on that piece of it. Another thing, and this is something I also said to the Vermont Climate Council, is to somewhere, and I've only read the executive summary, but I'm assuming it would be in there if it was in the main document, and that's to at least acknowledge that some of this stuff that we're planning, and this goes to something that Annette said, there is a huge uncertainty in the supply chain for some of the technologies that Vermont is counting on. And also increasing, if in fact we're going to increase our dependence on weather dependent technologies like solar, then that's a double whammy. And people who aren't geeks about this, like some of us, then they're entitled to know that in a document like this coming from the public service job is to be looking out for the interests of Vermont ratepayers. I really hope that you can find some place to insert 2 sentences, maybe, to at least acknowledge those things. And what else have I got here? The other around language is around something more honest. Or earlier, I forget, I'm not picking on you, Ed, or whoever else was talking about, a just, equitable, environmentally sound is in the executive summary. That we are fair about the words. We say that if nuclear is not renewable, and I'm not a pro-nuke person, but if nuclear is not renewable because it's zero carbon, but it uses a mined resource. Well, you cannot have the wind, solar, battery thing without the same dependency on those mined things. And again, for the lay person who's trying to invest their hard-earned money, it just seems gross negligence to at least for your department. And I'm sorry that I'm pushing hard, but I feel very strongly about your role in the state. And
so I want to stop you.
Sure, that's fine.
Because you've made very clear comments, and I know that Ed is a very good listener, and I want to ask Ed to respond to your comments.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
well, first, Pat, I want to thank you for actually understanding our role in the state. That's not very particularly widespread, so appreciate your understanding of what we do, and also appreciate your pushback. I mean, none of us would be doing this if we're milquetoast, hiding behind a curtain somewhere. This is a public document. We're asking for genuine feedback, and I appreciate that. As I mentioned earlier to Annette, is we're looking, part of what we're trying to do with this CEP, with this draft, is actually articulate and be transparent about the trade-offs. It's difficult to identify them all, and we definitely have not done it. And I'll very much acknowledge that. So appreciate folks for calling us on that and saying, you're missing a piece here. This could use some additional information. And so I appreciate your tone. I didn't find anything disrespectful, or, I very much appreciate your comments on that. And so it's increasing the transparency about the trade-offs is an important component, and very much appreciate what you have actually already flagged for us. I don't know, Pat, if you had some more on there, or.
No, I think I'll send in. I would like to see changes in language. I think using the word renewable is disingenuous. I appreciate that there's more cleaner instead of clean. That's something that's a personal thing that I try to do, is to get people to get away from using the word clean. But energy generation or non-carbon generation, these are a little more transparent, to use your word, terms, and to just go through the whole document and really think about, well, what's the message that the average person gets when they read a news story, and the news story just takes your words and uses them, and frankly, just and equitable does not stop at our state line.
So I want to thank you for your comments, and I want to shift to other people who may have comments. And I don't want to shut you off. If you have more discussion that you want to make about this, please continue to have it via email. And at this moment, we're in an online conversation, so I want to encourage other people who have comments to make them. So
I see that Lisa is next, so please go ahead, Lisa.
yeah, Lisa. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I have to confess from the start, I have not had time to wade through this document other than to look at it very briefly. So I've been listening to others here. And I will comment more when I have reviewed it more thoroughly. But here are my concerns right out of the box. It seems to me that there's a big emphasis on building and spending in general in this country. That's our way out of global warming and our solution to it, to build and spend, build and spend. And I think that we need to recognize that building something, even if it's net zero, comes at an environmental cost. And I'd like to see a little more recognition of perhaps the low carbon footprints and conservation minded lifestyles that perhaps a lot of Vermonters have been living for many, many years. I'm not sure there's a place for working Vermonters here, and to mandate with the carrot or stick approach, to mandate or to reward someone buying electric cars or buying into whatever this new technology might be that is sanctioned. That comes at a cost to people who can't afford that. For instance, say all of the wealthy in this state go to electric cars. Electricity ratchets through the roof. You think electricity rates aren't going to go up if we all go to electricity? If there's even enough electricity produced and available on the grid for all of these electric devices, which is highly questionable with the infrastructure we have out there. There's just so much that is unreasonable about this plan. And the other trend that I'm seeing right out of the box, I am a real estate appraiser and an assessor and president of the Vermont Association of Listers and Assessors. And we've been talking a lot about solar installations and taxation of same. And if you realize that the exemptions and special treatment that we have given those industries, okay, maybe that's for the political greater good, but when we tax solar installations at only the municipal rate, take a look at your tax bill. I'll bet you that a quarter to a third of your total real estate tax bill is municipal and the rest is education. So when these solar installations, which are for-profit companies for the most part, are not paying into the ed tax, who do you think is picking up the difference for that? You guessed it, regular working Vermonters, and particularly those who are working our butts off and don't get the state payment, and we just pay on both ends. Let's keep squeezing the middle class, and I feel like all of these solutions are going to do just that. So I'd like to see some kind of
Would you like a response?
Affordability.
Ed, do you have a response?
Great, thanks, Lisa. What we tried to do in the plan, the draft plan, is to also talk about demand reduction, weatherization. Even the discussions about net zero ready homes are talking about how new buildings can reduce the need for fuel for additional costs. It's something that we have in the plan, but recognize what I'm hearing from you is we need to say more, and not just about demand reductions, but also about, sounds like lifestyle choices as well. Did I get that right? As the individual actions that people can take as well, and recognize that this is a plan that's much more focused on state policies, state programs, less on individual decision making, and that's potentially an avenue that we can look at for the final iteration, which is plans only go so far. It's individuals make choices, and maybe being more explicit about that in the final plan. Am I hearing you properly?
Yes, I hear you on that part, Ed, and I appreciate that. Yes, and hopefully we will continue to have the right to make those individual choices on our own. My concern is that the legislature, being very dominated at this moment with a renewable emphasis, there are going to be tax breaks for all of this. And again, who do you think pays for these exemptions when we hand them out? We're handing out exemptions to for-profit companies, and residential taxpayers are bearing the brunt of this. And there's a lot on us already as residential taxpayers. I feel that myself every time I pay my own tax bill. So I just have to speak up for that as an assessor. I just deal with it every day, all day.
No, thank you. Appreciate that. And as I've said a couple of times, we're really trying to increase transparency, including in the electric sector, where costs are coming from, including mandates. I'm not sure that we specifically got into some of the tax exemption, but the more transparency, the more that we can put in this plan, the better. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And speaking of legislative, I see that Laura Sibilia, I believe you've got your hand up next.
I do. Thank you. I'm just popping in. We are here having dinner in Goose City. I will be honest and say I have not read the plan yet, but I wanted to listen to the comments and also just take a moment to express appreciation to the department. I know you all have been extremely busy working also on the Climate Council and getting this out at the same time. And so thank you for more information. And I'd like to thank everybody who came out and is commenting. I'm listening and hope you all have a great night.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Philip, is there anybody else? I'm not seeing any hands raised. I have not checked the chat. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment?
I see none. No, but anyone's welcome to raise their hand or just jump in if you can go right now.
And given that we may not have anybody else who wants to speak, but we'd love to hear from them. The current slide is opportunities for current comment. There'll be 5 physical meetings across the state. And there's an opportunity for written comment. And those are shown on the slide. And you can see the draft comprehensive energy plan at the link that's included at the last bullet of the slide that you see before you. So do people have questions or comments about how to proceed from here? Because my understanding, I'm a neutral outside facilitator. My understanding is the department is very much committed to hearing from everybody. So help us with how to make it more convenient for you to comment. So any comments, questions?
I do just want to note that Lisa dropped something into the chat. Please consider another online forum or two in hopes of getting more citizens to participate. in this, also in the interest of saving emissions if we don't drive to a meeting. I will note that the 5 in-person meetings is a artifact of the statute. We're required to do that. And also it's important to note that there are still a fair number of folks in Vermont, despite best efforts by the telecom folks here at Department of Public Service and folks at the legislature to get broadband to everybody. There's still some limitations on that. And so we are going out to different areas of the state to get a comment. And we've already started thinking, Lisa, about having some additional online opportunities as well. Recognize that this was a fairly short turnaround with a pretty significant holiday between when we issued the draft and when we had this first public meeting. So appreciate the comment and thanks. We need to talk internally. I'm not just going to commit everybody else, at the department to this, but definitely hear that. So thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ed. And any other questions or comments before we adjourn?
I see Pat raised her hand again. Pat,
Yeah, Pat.
go ahead.
Yes, sorry, it took me a minute. I'm just curious. I know a while back, Representative McCormick mentioned this or was quoted in a paper mentioning it. And when the national highway speed was reduced in the Carter administration because of the oil embargo, and EPA ran the numbers of the increase in emissions by putting it back up. And we're supposed to be dealing with the next 10 years. This is when we need the most reduction. And I'm curious if there is any conversation at the regional, I'm not even sure regional can do it, or if it has to be at the national level to reduce the highway speed again. Thank you.
So, sorry, Pat, I'm not clear about your question. What was that?
The question is why isn't reducing the highway speed the top of the list for immediate emissions reduction that is fair, equitable? It checks all the boxes, and yet it is not on the list.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
Yeah, and thank you, Pat. I try not to do this. I try not to punt to other entities. This is, we look at all energy issues, including transportation. That is something that honestly would not have occurred to me. So thank you for flagging it. That's something that Vermont Agency of Transportation also has their own plans as well. And we'll touch base with the folks at Agency of Transportation. They're more the experts on those issues, on that particular issue, but honestly, it had not occurred to me. So thank you.
It's big. It's a lot of numbers.
Yep.
Big number.
Yeah.
So other questions, comments? So if you have additional questions or comments as you consider this conversation or look at the plan, look at the slide that is in front of you now, and you can make comments up until December 20th. So, please, the department encourages your comments and look forward to hearing from you. And I'm going to pass it over now to you, Ed.
Yeah, great. I just want to say thanks very much for coming out tonight. It is important to get these comments. I think of us as oftentimes a bunch of nerds sitting in, used to be an office, now it's individual homes, developing this draft, talking to a lot of folks, and getting these comments really helps drive home some of the points that we're missing. Very much appreciate the time that everyone's taken so far. Would encourage folks, to participate in some of the other forums, to provide some written comments, via email. Anything else, any thoughts that you have are very much welcome. And again, thank you very much for participating in this. This is the plan for the entire state. So thank you very much. With that, I think we're adjourned. Thank you.